Okay, so you guys sent this TMZ article in about Dr. Dre and a restraining order, and, well, we got to dive in.
Yeah.
This has got to be like classic Hollywood drama, right?
Yeah.
You got a music icon, a messy public divorce, and now some pretty intense accusations.
Yeah. It's funny. Celebrity cases, they always seem to be a little bit more interesting.
Right.
Just because these are figures who we all know larger than life, and to see them in these kind of like personal conflicts, I don't know, it's just more fascinating.
And this one, like, really goes there.
Yeah.
So the article says that it's actually Dre's former psychiatrist, a Dr. Charles Sophie, who filed the restraining order against him.
Okay.
And it gets even juicier when you realize that Sophie actually counseled both Dre and his ex-wife, Nicole Young, during their divorce.
Oh, wow.
Talk about awkward.
Yeah, that's a whole other layer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially since, Sophie's claiming that Dre was sending him threatening text messages for over a year and a half.
Yeah. That's the thing that really caught my eye, too, is that, like, Sophie wants Dre to stay 100 yards away from him, which, okay, fine, whatever standard restraining order stuff.
Yeah.
But then it's like it gets a little wilder. Sophie also wants the order to include his 22-year-old son and even their dogs.
Oh, really?
I mean, at that point, is it really about safety, or are we just, like, making a statement?
That's the million-dollar question that the court has to answer.
Yeah.
Because just because you file for a restraining order doesn't mean it's automatically granted.
Right.
So he's going to have burden of proof here.
Yeah.
He has to convince a judge that there's a credible threat to his safety, and it can't just be, a little bit of back and forth between people who don't like each other.
So how do courts actually decide, like, what is a credible threat? Is it purely based on, like, the content of the messages? Or do they look at the bigger picture, too?
Yeah, so you're not just looking at the text message in isolation.
Right.
You're looking at it in context of, the history between the parties.
Okay.
Are there other concerning actions? Yeah. Other than just the text messages.
Which brings us back to the divorce, I guess, because the article mentions it was
Right.
pretty contentious, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah.
And TMZ kind of gets into the nitty-gritty a little bit, like some of these specific accusations from the divorce.
Yeah.
Apparently, Dre's attorney is saying that Sophie was actually trying to turn Dre's son against him during this whole thing.
Uh-huh.
Which, like, if that's true,
Yeah.
that seems like a big no-no for a therapist, right?
Yeah. I mean, that raises some red flags for me, certainly.
Yes.
Therapists are supposed to be these neutral parties, right?
Yeah.
Helping families through difficult situations.
Right.
But if this is true, and he was actively working against Dre's interests during this very sensitive time,
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes you question his objectivity.
Yeah.
Potentially even grounds for like a malpractice suit or something.
And the article even shares, like, they have these snippets of these alleged texts from Dre to Sophie.
Like calling him a bitch and saying things like, "Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you."
Okay, strong words for sure.
Right.
But again, like we were talking about earlier, the court needs to decide, do these rise to the level of a credible threat?
Right.
It's a fine line between just like angry venting and actual harassment.
Yeah.
So I'm sure Dre's lawyers are going to argue that this was taken out of context, just blowing off steam,
Yeah.
not actual threats.
But Sophie obviously felt differently enough to file this restraining order.
Sure.
And it's not even just a restraining order, right? The article says he's also suing Dre.
Oh, really?
For like a lot of money, like we're talking $10 million.
Oh, wow. Okay, so yeah, now it's getting interesting.
Right.
Yeah, this is where the legal strategy comes in.
Right.
Because the restraining order, right, that's about Soki's safety today.
Right.
The lawsuit, this is where it gets expensive.
What do you mean?
Well, he's suing for emotional distress, which is pretty standard in cases like this.
But $10 million, that's a very specific number, and it's a big number.
Wow.
And I think that it's very strategically chosen.
Strategically, how so?
Well, think about it, Dr. Dre. Very wealthy individual.
Right.
$10 million. While significant,
Right.
not going to bankrupt him.
Right.
But it sends a message.
Right.
It sets a precedent.
Yeah.
And it might make Dre think twice about behaving this way in the future if he knows another lawsuit could cost him millions of dollars.
So it's kind of like a warning shot in a way.
Exactly.
Right.
This is Sophie's way of saying, these actions have consequences, and I'm not going to be quiet about it. I'm going to fight back.
Right.
And, no amount of money can fully compensate for, like, the emotional distress.
Right.
But a big financial win, it can at least give a sense of justice,
Yeah.
some closure for the plaintiff.
Right. That makes sense. But then it's not even just the lawsuit he has to worry about, right? Because
Yeah.
now there's this whole medical board complaint thing.
Right.
So what does that actually mean? Like, what does that entail? How much trouble could Sophie actually be in?
Yeah, because the TMZ article mentioned that Dre filed a complaint with the medical board about all this.
Right.
So what does that even mean for Dr. Sophie? Like,
Yeah.
is that just like a slap on the wrist, or could this actually, like, really ruin his career?
So this is where it could get really serious for Dr. Sophie.
Okay.
You know, medical boards, they have a lot of power.
Yeah.
They're kind of like the referees of the medical world. It's their job to uphold those ethical standards,
Right.
you know, patient safety, all of that.
Yeah.
So when a complaint like this gets filed,
Yeah.
they have to take it seriously.
Right. So, like, what happens? Do they just take Dre at his word, or is there like an actual investigation?
Oh, yeah, there's a whole process.
Okay.
They're going to be gathering evidence. They're going to interview witnesses.
Right.
They could even bring in Dre and Dr. Sophie themselves.
Wow.
And they're just looking for any indication that Sophie stepped over the line.
Right. Or that he acted unethically, especially during that time working with Dre and Nicole.
So say they actually find something. What happens? What are the consequences?
It really depends on what they find.
Right.
Could be something minor, like a letter of reprimand.
Right.
Maybe he has to go to some ethics training, something like that.
Okay.
But like worst case scenario, they could suspend or even fully revoke his medical license.
Well,
And that would basically be the end of his career.
so even if he wins the restraining order, even if he wins the lawsuit,
Right.
his career is still kind of hanging in the balance here.
Exactly. And even if he's cleared of everything,
Right.
just the fact that there was an investigation, that can really damage a doctor's reputation.
Oh, totally.
You know, patients might hesitate to trust him.
Right.
And that's hard to rebuild once it's broken.
It's just crazy how this thing started, right? Like celebrity divorce.
I know, right?
And it's just spiraled into this whole legal battle, this whole professional ethics thing.
Yeah, and it's high stakes all around. Totally, yeah. Like everything's on the line here.
It just goes to show these situations are messy
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you've got this restraining order,
Yeah.
which is about right now, are you safe today?
Right.
You've got the lawsuit, which is about the money.
Right.
And then you have this ethical layer
Right.
with the medical board.
Right. And potentially even like criminal charges too, right? Depending on what they find.
Right, exactly. It could go there too.
So much we just don't know yet.
Exactly.
So where do things stand now? Like, what are the big questions that we should be looking out for as this all unfolds?
Well, first of all, we need to see if Dre is actually going to have to stay away.
Right.
Will that restraining order be granted?
Right.
Then, of course, we've got the lawsuit.
Right.
And with this much money involved, I mean, this could drag on for years.
Oh, yeah.
You know, lurking over all of this is the medical board investigation.
Right.
That could take months, could even take years to be completely resolved. It's just crazy. It makes you wonder, with these high-profile cases,
Right.
where it's so much money,
Yeah.
so much reputation on the line, like, are we ever really going to know, like, the full truth?
Right. Are we just getting this carefully crafted version of events?
Yeah,
It's a good question.
it really is.
And I don't know if we'll ever really know the answer.
Well, that's our deep dive into the wild world of Dr. Dre, restraining orders, and the power of medical boards.
That's right.
Just goes to show you, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's a lot more complicated than it looks at first glance.
It really is.
All right, until next time, everyone, keep those questions coming, and we will keep digging for answers.
See you next time.